Well, folks, Super Bowl weekend is upon us, the most watched TV spectacle of the year. And as we're well aware, lots of money on the line. Not just those advertising dollars, but actually at the event itself. Every NFL franchise angles to bring the attraction to their city. And they always pitch that one idea of tourist revenue and higher sales numbers. Of course, local business owners, even the mayor himself, quickly bought into the idea of all that money coming to Glendale.
Economic benefit for the city of Glendale. There's certainly benefits to having this event. There's no doubt about it.
Now, this is a trend we've seen before. Glendale's put down some pretty big bets on pro sports over the last few years, spending about $200 million on a hockey arena for the Phoenix Coyotes, a team now bankrupt, a spring training ballpark, and of course, bringing the Super Bowl to Glendale. Now, with the hockey team declaring bankruptcy and baseball teams only there for a fraction of the year, one big question many local taxpayers want to know: is all this money really worth it for them? Today, we find out by turning to economist and author Neil DeMoss. Now, you may have heard of his book, Field of Schemes. I got to say, I like that title, Neil. Thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Now, we do know this. Taxes are up in Glendale. A lot of residents out there feeling the brunt of this big game, maybe a fun event. But at the end of the day, solely from the in-state event standpoint, who is really the biggest winner here on a financial basis?
Yeah, I mean, clearly the NFL is the big winner from the Super Bowl. I mean, that's how they organize it. That's how they require that cities put up a lot of money to pay for a lot of the events and security and things like that surrounding the game. Economists have looked at this over and over again, and there's a pretty strong consensus that the claims of, $600 million in economic impact from the Super Bowl, if you move the decimal point over one and get to around 60 million, you're pretty good. And that's just economic activity, right? Money changing hands. Really, when you talk about what's the sales tax revenue, what's the income tax revenue, you probably have to move it over again and get somewhere in the 6 million figure range. And at that point, you're spending as much on things like increased police protection as you are gaining from actual spending on the game.
And see, there's not just one big invoice that the city of Glendale can send to the NFL. It doesn't really work like that. There are already tax systems in place. One of those being a sales tax. And we know Glendale shoppers pay over 9%, one of the highest in the state. The mayor's clearly convinced that the Super Bowl will be a big payoff. How long before we will know if there's any return on this year's taxpayer investment in Glendale specifically? How long before we know all the numbers there?
I'm not sure when the new sales tax data comes out. It will probably be a few months to a year before you can actually sit down and crunch all the numbers. But one of the problems with Glendale is similar to the problem that New Jersey faced last year with the Super Bowl, which is people aren't necessarily going to spend all their money in Glendale, right? In New Jersey, they had the game, but lots of people were staying in New York, were spending money in New York, were going out to dinner in New York City. And, again, that's a problem when you're in a big metro area. You don't necessarily even get all the benefit of the new spending, even if the new spending is overblown.
Now we're seeing here's some ticket prices online going for almost as high as $10,000 just for people to get into the game. It's kind of a corporate event, isn't it? I mean, there's not really a lot of local people and just fans of the game who get to go out there. They have to be pretty well endowed, or they have to have some means to make it into the gate there. For the local person in the average area, are they going to even know that a Super Bowl is going on next door to them?
They might know because they'll see, the traffic and they'll see the people heading there. But no, you're absolutely right. Most of the big events, whether it's Super Bowl, World Cup, Olympics, World Series, it tends to be more for the well-heeled who can afford to go to these things rather than for the local folks. Which is one reason economists say that you see a diminution of the economic impact, which is that a lot of people tend to try and clear out of town when the big game is going on because, it's just like we don't want to deal with the hassle.
Hey, put the house up for rent. Maybe scalp your place out as like a little bit of a living arrangement. Maybe make some coin on the side. It wouldn't hurt. But
London during the 2012 Olympics, apparently right around the Olympic Games, was packed and the rest of London was dead empty.
Go figure. Well, they have to have the event somewhere, right? I mean, and for all these political leaders, the mayors, the governors, they want that in their town, don't they? Don't you think it looks good on their resume to bring a big event like this to town?
It does, and it's a good way of sort of showing, hey, this is why we built that stadium, because now we can get the Super Bowl, and hey, isn't this terrific? There are lots of ways that mayors can spend money that may be less flashy, but might be more, impressive in terms of actual impact. You can't really put a plaque on reduced kindergarten class sizes the same way you can on the side of a stadium. But it's arguably a better investment. So, yeah, I mean, it's absolutely something that mayors can point to and say, hey, look, I got this done. Whether they should be taking credit for it or be worried about taking blame for it, that's another question.
We also know that NFL owners, the franchise front office also play a big role in this. They all want to bring the Super Bowl to their place. It's a badge of honor. But here's the main question. What are the people of Glendale getting out of this? With all this revenue pouring into the NFL's coffers, why do the taxpayers often get stuck with the bill?
That's really the way that the sports industry has set itself up recently. Ever since maybe 20, 30 years ago, when sports leagues and team owners realized that they could get an awful lot of public subsidies in exchange for the right to continue to have a team, get a new team, get a Super Bowl, get an Olympics, whatever it is. The leagues have really tried to extract any amount of money that they can as part of the bargain. And, there are only so many Super Bowls to go around. There are only so many NFL teams to go around. And, the leagues are not afraid to use that as leverage. I mean, look what happened in Glendale with the Coyotes, right, with the NHL.
Mm-hmm.
They've been paying the team $12, $15 million a year every year just to play there after building them an arena because the league was saying, well, the team might leave if you don't do this.
It's a lot of leverage there. And of course, we've heard some big estimates. You mentioned some of these over the past few years. $600 million of local revenue coming to New York, New Jersey for the Super Bowl. Can you give us any insight? How do economists really formulate these projections? Do they take past Super Bowls into account, or is it some kind of a new, maybe optimistic equation? Where do these numbers come from?
Well, they have a board and these darts. It's
Sounds
really
about
fascinating with the New Jersey estimate because people tried to research that. I didn't, and some other reporters.
Right. 6 minutes.
The spokesperson for the Super Bowl committee said, "Yeah, that was from a survey that we did back in 2008, and we didn't actually release it. And no, you can't have a copy. But anyway, it says $600 million, so it's a little bit hard to fact check that."
Just trust us, right? I mean, so much for sabermetrics and all the different advanced data going into the NFL. I guess it doesn't translate to the economist side. But okay, let's suppose this for a second. Maybe we're getting hypothetical here, but suppose a local leader stepped up and demanded a share of the TV ad revenue or maybe some of the larger share of profits in exchange for all the public safety, the emergency services, all these things. Does the NFL contribute in any way to this? Do we know that for sure? Or does the NFL maintain this aura of entitlement that cities should somehow be privileged to have them come to town?
You may remember that the NFL tried to get people who performed at the Super Bowl halftime show to pay for the privilege earlier this year.
Even Katy Perry, I believe. They asked her, hey, pay for the privilege to come.
Right. And I think that that's fairly typical of the NFL's attitude here. It's like, hey, this is the Super Bowl. We have it. We can decide whether you get it or not. You have to live with our demands or, we'll take it somewhere else. And I think any mayor who decided to say, hey, how about we get a share of the boodle would quickly hear that and say, okay, thanks, sorry, we're going to go somewhere else. Which, again, it might be worth it to do that because I don't know if the costs of hosting a Super Bowl are worth it when you weigh in, compared to the small amounts of benefits that your city gets.
That's the old fable, the rule, the golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rule. Quick comment, shifting gears here. There's a lot of talk in Boston right now about the 2024 Summer Olympics, years away, almost a decade down the road. Boston Mayor Marty Walsh pushing extremely hard to get that event there in Boston. Do you know anything about the Olympics, what that's done in the past for American cities, and is this a similar trend, or is there, because it's a longer event, it sets up shop, do the local regions see any more of an economic stimulus because the event lasts longer in this case?
Yeah, I mean, the Olympics is really the Super Bowl writ large. It lasts 3 weeks. Economists have similarly, some of the same economists have tried to look and see whether the Olympics bring in any kind of substantial revenue to cities in the way that Super Bowl doesn't. And, the Olympics haven't done really that much better. Again, you've got this same problem that, if you're a city big enough and prominent enough to host the Olympics, you're going to be getting some tourists anyway. People would go to London in the summer if the Olympics weren't there. People would go to Boston. So what you're doing is you're driving away people who otherwise would be going there and will say, hey, I'll go somewhere else this summer in exchange for Olympic tourists. And when you add in the headaches of, traffic and having to build all of these velodromes and, swimming centers and things like that, it never works out. It's conceivable you could make an Olympics work out if you kept the costs very, very low. But again, the IOC behaves much like the NFL in that they're saying, well, we have these Olympics, you have to meet our demands if you want to host them. And it makes it very, very difficult for any city to try to run an Olympics that is going to even break even.
They've got these cities in the right spot. They're eating right out of their hand, just giving all these sales presentations, trying to land the bid. It's an interesting predicament to be in. Even in Boston, there was one big 60,000 stadium they recently revealed they would build in the South End that they would end up tearing down and recycling the parts after it was over. That just, I think, sounds a little odd to a lot of average common folk living in the area, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, that was a very weird proposal, and I think the reason is that the IOC is really sick of having stadiums sitting around empty years later because it's an embarrassment to them.
Yeah, it's the reminder.
Yeah, so they were like, okay, fine, we'll tear it down afterwards. I mean, the London Stadium was downscaled, but this one they were saying, we'll tear it down afterwards completely. And then it turned out that it was going to cost just as much to build a stadium and tear it down as it would to build one that would stay there. So I don't know if that's going to go over any better, but you understand the reasoning, even if it's a little bit sideways.
I hear you there. A lot of good information, Neil. Thanks for coming on with us today. Before we let you go, just give us a little bit more insight, something maybe we haven't talked about today, what we can find or expect in the book Field of Schemes.
Oh, man. Well, we did the book and then we did 10 years later and updated the book because this has just kept going on. And now we run a website, fieldofschemes.com, which continually updates it on Olympics, Super Bowls, anything having to do with sort of the stadium and arena subsidy business. So, hop on the website anytime and you'll find something new.
All right, I'm sure you'll see a lot of web traffic from Boston. People want to know about the Olympics, also, of course, Glendale. Neil, thanks for coming on with us today. We appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Writer and author Neil Demoz, you can find out more about him at his website there, fieldofschemes.com, also at demoz.net. Up next, today's special reports and Money Matters with Amanda Gabriel.